Slap. It wasn't loud. More of a sharp pop as the flight attendant's manicured hand swatted Matteo's fingers away from the first-class menu. Gasps rippled through the cabin. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just slowly pulled his hand back and looked down at his lap. The tray table in front of him vibrated slightly from the impact. The menu sat just inches away. So close, so off-limits. Clara Voss, the lead flight attendant, stood over him, tall, polished, and very certain of her authority. "This is first class," she said clearly, making sure everyone heard. "Snack boxes are enough for a kid like you." And just like that, the air turned thick, sticky. Embarrassment hung over the aisle like turbulence. Matteo blinked once, his face unreadable. Beside him, his grandmother didn't say a word. She didn't have to. 9 minutes later, Clara's name would be removed from Liberty Sky's employee directory, and $6.4 billion across Europe would freeze like a shuttered runway. But first, let's go back to how it began. 25 minutes earlier, the hum of Liberty Sky Flight 338's first-class cabin wrapped around Matteo like a strange kind of dream. All leather, silk, and the scent of citrus-scented sanitizer. It was the quiet that unnerved him most. He'd never flown first class before, had never even peeked behind the curtain that separated coach from this world of cloth napkins and noise-canceling everything. At 10 years old, Matteo Delacroix stood at the threshold of row 2, blazer buttoned, satchel in hand, heart thumping just under his pressed collar. "You're good," his grandmother said gently behind him. "Shoulders down, chin up, just like we practiced." He nodded once, just enough to register. Not too much. That would look nervous. Row 2A. That was his seat, window view, his favorite. Matteo slid into place, careful not to bump the armrest. He folded his jacket behind him with the same precision he used at home when setting the dinner table. Everything had its place. A leather-bound menu already sat on the tray table, embossed with the Liberty Sky logo, a pair of wings that somehow looked judgmental. He reached for it, barely touching the edge. Then a voice. "Oh, no, sweetie, that's not for you." Clara Voss appeared, her eyes smiling but her tone razor-sharp. "We don't serve the gourmet menu to children. You'll get a snack box in a moment, all right?" She turned before waiting for a response. Matteo froze. His hand still hovered an inch from the menu cover. His fingers curled slightly. He looked toward his grandmother, but she didn't meet his eyes. Instead, she stared straight ahead, face calm, hands folded over her lap. But Matteo noticed something. The quiet flex of her jaw, the slow, precise way she opened the leather cover of her tablet without a sound. Something shifted in him, not anger, not confusion, just something colder. He'd been here before, not in seat 2A, but in the space between being noticed and being ignored. At school, when the chess coach asked if he was someone's little brother. At the museum, when a security guard followed him down 2 exhibits. But this was worse. Because here, in this floating palace above the world, a stranger had looked at him, jacket, manners, posture and all, and still decided, "You don't belong here." And she made sure everyone around them knew it too. He looked at the menu again. Not with longing this time, but calculation. He was already memorizing the layout. The shine of the leather, the stitching along the border, a future reference point. Across the aisle, a woman lowered her tablet, her brow furrowed. 2 rows back, a man muttered under his breath, "Yikes." Clara didn't notice. Or maybe she did. She came back 5 minutes later holding a tiny plastic box, grapes, crackers, a juice pouch. She placed it in front of him like it was a reward. "There you go," she said, tone cheery. "Kid-friendly and mess-free." Then she leaned down just slightly and added, louder than necessary, "We don't want truffle oil on your pants, do we?" Matteo didn't respond, but something behind his eyes darkened. Not hate. Not even sadness. It was the quiet steel of someone who had been taught that dignity didn't need noise. The camera phones came next. Subtle, discreet, but present. Passengers who weren't ready to interrupt, but ready to document. He didn't look at them either. He reached for his cloth napkin, unfolded it, and laid it gently on his lap. Not out of hunger, he had none, but habit, honor, stillness. Solène Delacroix remained still beside him, but under the tray table, her fingers moved swiftly over her screen. Matteo knew her well. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask for managers. She wrote standards. 12 years ago, she'd authored a framework now used by over 40 airlines and 19 international banks, AerEthica Core, a live protocol system that graded airlines in real time based on ethical conduct. And she still had top-level clearance. One tap, a flagged incident, a 3-minute internal review, and one emergency memo, encrypted and sent directly to the European Ethics Council's Financial Compliance Unit. No one in row 2 noticed. But in Brussels, lights started blinking red, and Liberty Sky's name began fading from partner networks faster than Clara could say, sparkling water. Back in seat 2A, Matteo reached for a cracker, broke it in half, and placed it back into the tray. Not a protest, a marker, a quiet signal. He had always believed that silence could be louder than shouting if you waited long enough. Now, the entire plane was waiting with him. The hum of the engines didn't cover the discomfort anymore. It only emphasized it. People whispered. One man leaned toward his wife and said, "That flight attendant's career's done." A teenager across the aisle shook her head and tapped out a message on her phone. Even the junior flight attendant, the one shadowing Clara, seemed unsure, her hand trembling slightly as she passed out hot towels. Matteo didn't move, but he felt it, the change in the air, the slow unraveling. Clara walked past again, this time with her chin slightly higher, as if reaffirming her authority. But Matteo just stared forward, hands folded, legs straight, the picture of quiet endurance. His grandmother finally glanced over, just once, then nodded. It wasn't approval. It was confirmation. The storm had begun. Matteo had learned 2 kinds of silence in his short life. The first was soft, the kind that blanketed their apartment in Geneva after dinner, when the teapot hissed gently on the stove and his grandmother flipped pages of her book in the armchair by the window. The second was sharp, the kind that pressed against his chest now, seatbelt tight, as the snack box sat untouched on his tray table. He could feel the eyes again, not all of them. Some passengers respectfully looked away, but a few still lingered, glancing at him like he was a walking mistake. A child who had wandered too far past the curtain. The worst part? They didn't even whisper anymore. They just let it hang. A collective agreement made in raised eyebrows and polite smirks. One man a few rows up leaned toward his wife. 10 years old and already entitled, he muttered. Matteo didn't flinch. His fingers rested lightly on the corner of the napkin in his lap, folding and unfolding its edge with a rhythm only he noticed. He wasn't trying to make a scene. He was just trying not to disappear. Across the aisle, a girl, maybe 14, made eye contact with him. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just looked. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to recognition. Then she turned her phone slightly, enough for him to see she was recording. Not him, but the moment. The box, the menu he never touched, the back of Clara's uniform as she disappeared into the galley. Matteo gave her the smallest nod. He remembered something from weeks ago, a conversation with his grandmother at the breakfast table. He'd asked what dignity really meant. He'd heard it in class, in a book, maybe even on the news, but no one had ever explained it like she did. Dignity, she said, pouring honey into her tea, is the ability to stay rooted in who you are, even when the world tries to shrink you. She'd paused, then added, "It's not always loud. It's not always fair, but it's yours." Matteo didn't fully understand it then. He did now. He looked over. Solène Delacroix sat calmly, as if none of this had happened. as if her grandson hadn't just been humiliated in front of half the cabin. But Matteo knew better. She wasn't ignoring him. She was watching. Her fingers moved with that deliberate elegance she always carried, unlocking her tablet, sliding through security prompts, navigating into a system Matteo had only heard whispers about. He knew it as AerEthica Core, a cross-border evaluation platform that assessed the ethics of airlines, financial behavior, and passenger treatment. It was tied to banks, airports, even credit scoring systems for travel partnerships. She had written the first version of it. Matteo had seen the framed blueprint in her home office, a flowchart scrawled in blue ink, with arrows leading to terms like passenger equity, youth protocol, and ethical triggers. At the center of it all, her initials. Now she was inside the system again, and that meant something was already in motion. Solène didn't speak. Not yet. But Matteo saw her eyes flicker to him. That was enough. He didn't need her to ask if he was okay. He didn't need her to march to the front of the plane and demand an apology. That wasn't how she moved. Her power wasn't in confrontation. It was in precision. Meanwhile, Clara walked the aisle again, offering gourmet menus to every adult. Matteo counted silently. Row 3, row 4, row 5. Each time, the same script. Welcome to Liberty Sky First Class. Here are today's selections. Not once did she glance back toward him. But Matteo noticed something. Her smile had tightened. The kind of tightness that came from discomfort. From knowing something wasn't quite right, even if you didn't yet know what it was. 7 rows back, a man whispered. Didn't they just get flagged in that EU ethics report last month? His partner shrugged. Wouldn't be surprised. Matteo sat straighter in his seat, his hands folded neatly on his lap. Not because he was trying to appear older, but because he refused to let Clara's words make him smaller. He thought of his parents, both gone since he was 6, and the photo of them flying coach to New York, smiling like the cramped seats didn't matter. He thought of what his grandmother had told him that night. They didn't care where they sat. They cared how they were treated. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted to matter. Back in the front galley, Clara chatted with another crew member. She didn't notice the junior flight attendant staring at her shoes. She didn't see the way passengers were beginning to share looks, the ones that said, "We're not okay with this." She didn't notice the shift, but Matteo did. His grandmother's tablet gave the softest ding. Matteo glanced sideways. She turned the screen slightly, just enough for him to see a line of green check marks. A final tap, then nothing. She folded her hands. That was the moment. He didn't know the exact sequence. He didn't need to. But somewhere, a server in Brussels had just updated Liberty Sky's ethics rating to non-compliant youth protection violation. Somewhere, a bank's AI system flagged the airline for re-evaluation. Somewhere, financial access lines began to freeze. And somewhere, 3 digital payment providers started receiving alerts they were contractually obligated to act on. In exactly 3 more minutes, that decision would cost Liberty Sky everything. But in seat 2A, all was still. Matteo placed his napkin over the snack box. He didn't touch the crackers, didn't drink the juice. Not because he was protesting, but because it wasn't what he had been promised. He wasn't asking for more. He was asking for equal. Solène leaned slightly toward him. No one else noticed. She whispered, low and clear, "You belong here, even when they pretend you don't." Matteo didn't speak, but his eyes shone with something solid, something earned. Not through anger, not through argument, through presence. 2 rows up, someone coughed awkwardly. Clara passed again, offering sparkling water to a pair in 3D and 3F. She hesitated. This time, she looked at Matteo, just for a second, then looked away. Matteo smiled to himself. Just a flicker. He didn't need her to change. The world was already doing it for her. The 9th minute began like nothing had changed. In the first-class cabin, the engines hummed. The lights dimmed to a golden glow. Clara Voss returned to the galley to prep drink service, and Matteo remained still. But systems don't need noise to activate. They need precision. At 4:22 p.m. CET, a ping registered in the AerEthica core compliance server in Brussels. The flagged incident, passenger age discrimination, class-based disparity, and ethical service violation, matched 3 clauses under Article 4 of the Passenger Equity Framework. That alone wasn't fatal. But then came the name attached to the flag. Solène Margot Delacroix, Final Tier Certifier, Code Holder ID, HREU001. Within milliseconds, that changed everything. Inside the core server logs, a cascade began. Partner systems cross-referenced Solène's flag with Liberty Sky's current score. Their score had been dangerously close to the compliance floor. Her flag pushed it below threshold. The trigger response was immediate and brutal. First, EU Bank Global, the central lender for Liberty Sky's EU operations, froze all aviation-linked revolving credit lines, totaling $2.1 billion. Next, Nova Trans Trust, a Paris-based underwriting body, suspended risk coverage for all Liberty Sky transatlantic routes. By the 7th minute, 3 digital payment systems, SwiftFly, AeroPay, and EuroTap, had auto-suspended seat and upgrade transactions pending review. By minute 8, 6 partner airlines began receiving alerts through the shared Airethika Stream network. Caution, Liberty Sky, active passenger equity violation, rating downgraded, non-compliant. And in the 9th minute, Liberty Sky vanished from Gatebridge, the real-time booking and gate access platform across 42 international airports. Back in the sky, 37,000 feet over Germany, the captain's private comm buzzed. Captain Moreau blinked. A red line message from Operations Control flashed on the screen. Urgent compliance alert. Passenger rights violation flagged. Score, AerEthica Core, SOL's non-compliant. Stand by for legal freeze. Immediate hold on upgrade/transaction privileges. He turned to his co-pilot. Did we miss a security incident? The co-pilot shook his head, puzzled. Not that I've seen. Captain Moreau tapped the intercom button, summoning the purser. Meanwhile, in cabin 1A, Solène folded her tablet and slid it into her handbag like nothing happened. She didn't look proud. She looked precise. Matteo noticed something in her shoulders. Not tension, not victory, but quiet purpose. The kind of posture someone has when they've done this before. Flight purser Dana knocked lightly at the cockpit door. Captain? She asked. Something wrong? Captain Moreau didn't answer right away. He pointed to the message now flashing again. Liberty Sky access suspended in Gatebridge. AerEthica triggered freeze confirmed. Passenger report ID AERDEL/09. Dana frowned. That's from a certifier? The co-pilot nodded. Highest level. Dana swallowed. Do we know who? Captain Moreau hesitated. He clicked the manifest and searched the initials. When the name came up, his eyes widened. Row 2B, he muttered. Back in first class, Clara returned with a tray of drinks. She smiled at a passenger in 3A, then turned toward Matteo's row. She glanced briefly, only to find Solène watching her. Directly, calmly. No malice, no fear. Just presence. Clara paused mid-step. Something cold gripped her chest. She looked again, at the boy, still silent, still composed. Then at the tray in her hand. She placed the glass in 3C and hurried back toward the galley. 4 rows behind, a businessman refreshed his booking app and frowned. Hey, he muttered to his assistant beside him. Liberty Sky just disappeared from Gatebridge. His assistant blinked. What? He showed her the screen. Try booking a ticket. Gone. The woman across the aisle raised her brow. They pulled a listing midair? People started murmuring. Phones were lifted. Social media lit up. By minute 9 and 23 seconds, the news had hit Twitter. Breaking. Liberty Sky just got pulled off Gatebridge. Passenger rights violation flagged by a top certifier? This is big. Aviation ethics #Liberty Sky collapse. Passenger 4F quietly posted the photo she'd taken earlier. Clara standing over Matteo with the menu snatched away. The tweet gained 12,000 retweets in 6 minutes. At Liberty Sky HQ in Frankfurt, a red alert window took over the compliance screen. 6.4b in aviation-linked financing and insurance coverage suspended. Core compliance status, non-compliant. Immediate review mandated. The CEO's phone rang. He didn't pick up. He was watching the same video everyone else was. Clara Voss's condescending voice echoing through the cabin. Then that slap across a child's hand. Then the stillness. Then the face of a woman sitting beside him, unreadable, composed, and lethal. On board Flight 338, the mood had changed. It wasn't panic. It wasn't chaos. It was weight. A kind of reverence that fell over first class like snowfall. Passengers started whispering words like consequences, ethics, finally. The junior flight attendant, eyes wide, glanced at Matteo and softly placed a real menu on his tray. She didn't say anything. She just nodded once and walked away. Matteo looked at his grandmother. She met his eyes. There was no, "I told you so." No smugness, just that same stillness. She reached out and adjusted the napkin in his lap, then whispered, "Power isn't loud. It's knowing where to press and when to let the pressure do the rest." Clara returned, pale now, lips dry. She stopped at row 2, unsure what to say. She opened her mouth. Solène raised a single hand, not as a threat, but as a pause. "No need," she said quietly. "It's already been handled." By the time Flight 338 landed in New York, the damage was already done. Solène Delacroix didn't need to say a word. She didn't rush off the plane. She didn't raise her voice. She simply adjusted her grandson's scarf, took his hand, and walked down the jet bridge like any other passenger. Except she wasn't any other passenger, and Liberty Sky was no longer any other airline. Inside JFK's executive terminal, the fallout had arrived before the passengers did. Airport authorities had received the suspension code: Gate Bridge Ethics Override, Non-Compliant Carrier, Hold at Port. In plain English, it meant the airline's ethics score had dropped so low that the airport could legally deny disembarkation if passenger safety or dignity was at risk. This hadn't happened in years. But Solène's override had triggered the Brooks Clause, a rarely used aviation directive designed to halt potential systemic discrimination. The name on the clause? Dorothy Brooks, Solène's late colleague and co-founder of the Passenger Equity Alliance. Matteo noticed something as they walked. 3 gate agents were waiting, not for his grandmother, but for Clara Voss. The moment Clara stepped off, one of the agents calmly approached her. "Ma'am, please hand over your badge. You've been temporarily relieved of all flight duties pending ethics review." Passengers stopped, stared. Clara blinked. "Excuse me?" The agent didn't raise his voice. "You'll be escorted to debrief." The color drained from her face. It wasn't loud, but it was final. Solène didn't even glance back. She had no interest in humiliation. That wasn't the point. Her work had already moved beyond the gate. At Liberty Sky's Manhattan headquarters, a senior executive named Franz Keller was flipping through printed screenshots. One was of Clara's face. Another, Matteo's small hands over a tray with an untouched meal box. Another still, a side shot of Solène, unbothered, as chaos quietly erupted behind her. He knew who she was. Everyone in aviation compliance did. And he knew what this meant. Solène Delacroix didn't flag things unless she had documentation. And when she flagged something, Europe froze first. Then the rest followed. Back on the ground, Matteo sat quietly in the black town car that pulled up for them. His head rested against the window as the city blurred by. He still hadn't asked his grandmother what exactly she did. He didn't need to. The news on the radio filled in the blanks. Breaking: Liberty Sky Airlines suspended from all Gatebridge-linked terminals following an international ethics flag. Sources confirmed the report was filed by Solène Delacroix, one of the last active founders of the AerEthica core system. The announcer paused, then added, "Social media has erupted with footage from Flight 338, where a 10-year-old boy was reportedly denied meal service, then slapped by a senior crew member. Multiple EU banks have confirmed freezes totaling over $6 billion. Matteo didn't look at her. He just asked one question. "Are they going to lose everything?" Solène answered calmly, "They'll lose enough to remember you, and enough to remember every child that came before you." What she didn't say, at least not out loud, was that this wasn't about one boy and one tray. It was about a pattern. Solène had seen it for years. Quiet mistreatment of passengers too young, too brown, too out of place for first class. Her inbox had hundreds of messages from parents, from students, from people who didn't speak English well enough. They all started the same way. "I know you may not care, but I'm sure this doesn't matter, but maybe I'm overreacting, but..." And every time it ended with the same invisible bruise. They made me feel like I didn't belong. In the days that followed, Liberty Sky tried to control the narrative. Their PR team released a short statement. "We regret the isolated incident aboard Flight 338 and are conducting an internal review." But it was already too late. The story wasn't just about what happened. It was about who it happened to and who witnessed it. By day 2, 8 airports had suspended Liberty Sky's premium routes. By day 3, 2 major ESG funds dropped their positions, citing violation of the Passenger Integrity Index. By day 4, the CEO of Liberty Sky resigned, mid-press conference. And on day 5, a Senate hearing was announced. The topic? Ethics in modern aviation, discrimination, dignity, and the duty to serve. One name led the list of expert witnesses, Madame Solène Delacroix. In Geneva, Matteo sat on the floor of his grandmother's study, coloring as she prepared her testimony. He still didn't say much about the flight, but now, when he drew people on airplanes, he gave them real faces, not just uniforms. And when he drew himself, he put himself by the window, first row, head held high. He no longer drew his hands folded small. The final moment of the week happened in a quiet hallway outside the Senate chamber. A young page approached Solène as she waited. "Excuse me, ma'am," the girl said. "I saw what happened online. I just wanted to say thank you." Solène looked at her gently. "What's your name?" "Naomi." Solène smiled. "You're exactly who we write these laws for." The room was cold, not in temperature, in posture. Wood-paneled, camera-ready, and lined with rows of black suits, the Senate Subcommittee on Transportation Ethics didn't exactly feel welcoming. But Solène Delacroix had walked into colder rooms. She adjusted her navy blazer, placed her notes on the lacquered desk, and looked up, not at the senators, but at the clock above them. 9:00 a.m. Exactly 9 minutes since she entered. A quiet smile touched her lips. Senator Camden, a man with the charisma of a tax form, cleared his throat. "Madame Delacroix, thank you for flying in from Geneva." She nodded once. "The irony isn't lost on me, Senator." Some chuckled. He didn't. He glanced down at his statement. "You've submitted a 73-page report on systemic discrimination in premium airline services. We've all read it. What we'd like to hear now is, what made this case different?" Solène didn't miss a beat. It wasn't. That paused the room. She let it sit. 1 beat, 2, then added softly, "It was simply documented. By the right person, at the wrong time." A buzz of murmurs rippled down the aisle. Senator Pierce, older and sharper than Camden, leaned forward. "Are you saying this happens frequently?" "I'm saying it's designed to happen invisibly," Solène replied. Liberty Sky didn't fail because of one flight attendant. It failed because it assumed a boy like my grandson wouldn't be believed, and that someone like me wouldn't be seated next to him. A few eyebrows twitched. Some aides began whispering to their senators. Solène continued, calm and clear. "This wasn't about a meal or a slap. This was about a culture of polite cruelty, the kind you can't film, but you can feel. And it's time we stopped treating dignity like an optional upgrade." On the right side of the panel sat Senator Wyatt, a former airline executive turned politician. He didn't like where this was going. "Madame Delacroix," he said flatly, "are you suggesting federal regulation of in-flight service ethics? That's a slippery slope. What's next? Lawsuits over warm nuts and champagne brands?" Laughter. Polite, forced laughter. Solène didn't blink. "No, Senator. I'm suggesting that federal contracts should only go to airlines that treat every passenger as a paying human being, regardless of seat number, skin tone, or speech accent." Dead silence. Then she added, "And if that threatens your business model, perhaps it deserves to collapse." Senator Wyatt shifted uncomfortably. The cameras caught it. Twitter caught it faster. Outside the chamber, the crowd had grown. Activists, families, veterans, union leaders, and parents holding signs that read, "Dignity doesn't need first class. We all deserve a safe seat." But inside, the resistance was real. Lobbyists from the National Airlines Alliance sat just behind the senators. Their expressions were unreadable. Their donations, however, were not. Then came the surprise. Senator Pierce leaned forward again. "Madame Delacroix, we understand you're proposing a charter, a formal ethics protocol?" She nodded. "Yes, it's called the Passenger Equity Accord, a nonpartisan, enforceable standard based on the AerEthica framework. It doesn't punish mistakes, it punishes patterns." "And what would happen to airlines that don't sign on?" Solène looked straight at him. "Nothing, except they won't fly out of any of the 42 international airports tied to AerEthica compliance. They won't qualify for ESG-based funding, and they won't be considered for federal partnership grants." Pierce sat back. "That's ambitious." "No, Senator," she said evenly. "That's overdue." The press loved it. By noon, headlines lit up like fireworks. Solène Delacroix calls out polite cruelty in U.S. air travel. Passenger Equity Accord gains Senate support after Liberty Sky hearing. One columnist wrote, "She didn't slam the table, she didn't shout, she just held up a mirror, and the room flinched." By sunset, 6 senators had added their names in preliminary support of the accord. But the real shift came not from politics, but from people. A mother in Atlanta posted, "My son was called trouble on a flight last year for asking for orange juice twice. No one believed me. But today, someone like Solène did." A retired veteran tweeted, "They told me to use the bathroom in economy, even though I had a first-class seat. I served 22 years. I never complained. But I'm crying now." A former flight attendant, anonymous, wrote, "I was told to watch the black kids more carefully. I'm ashamed I didn't speak up then. I will now." Back at Solène's hotel that evening, Matteo was asleep on the sofa, curled under a throw blanket. He hadn't asked what happened in the hearing, but when she sat down beside him, he stirred just enough to say, "Did they listen?" She brushed a curl from his forehead. "Some did. Enough will." She looked out the window, the Capitol dome glowing gold in the distance. She wasn't done yet, but she had cracked the door open, and in the world of aviation, even a crack lets the sky in. By the end of the week, it wasn't just Liberty Sky on the hot seat. It was the entire industry. The Passenger Equity Accord, once dismissed as a niche European framework, had become a political buzzword, a legal draft, and worst of all for airline executives, a public expectation. Inside the Manhattan offices of Eagle Star Airlines, CEO Marla Jennings was pacing. She wasn't worried about passengers. She was worried about investors. 3 ESG funds had just suspended automatic reinvestments, pending ethics compliance verification. "Verify what?" she snapped at her general counsel. "We already have a diversity training module in place." The lawyer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, with all due respect, your internal ethics policy hasn't been updated since 2016, and our last incident report listed 2 minors being downgraded mid-flight without parental consent." Marla blinked. What?" He slid the report across the table. It wasn't public, but under the new AerEthica metrics, silence counts as pattern, not privacy. She fell silent. That was the worst part. The silence had started talking. Meanwhile, in Zurich, the AerEthica core headquarters was alive with movement. Technicians activated the ARX protocol, an industry-wide compliance sync that recalibrated airline rankings not by size or revenue, but by ethics score. 42 international airports were now actively indexing their boarding systems to AerEthica scores, with real-time alerts built into their check-in systems. If a carrier dropped below the passenger equity threshold, they'd be flagged and risk losing booking rights, gate access, or in extreme cases, operational clearance. In an office corner, Kavya Patel, one of the system's founding architects, reviewed incoming pushback. "Here comes the lobby machine," she muttered, scrolling through the industry statements. "We believe in dignity for all passengers. We take these allegations seriously. We are evaluating AerEthica's methodology." Kavya smirked. "They're not scared of change. They're scared it's working." On the ground, the effect was instant. Families began checking airlines' ethics scores before purchasing tickets. Online platforms like Skyfair and Flight Karma integrated AerEthica APIs to show verified ethical carrier badges beside flight options. And the numbers didn't lie. Bookings on compliant airlines jumped 11% in 4 days. 3 major travel credit cards updated their reward partnerships, dropping Liberty Sky and Eagle Star. 2 airports, Lisbon and Toronto, issued statements. "We will no longer partner with airlines deemed non-compliant under AerEthica 2.0. Inside Liberty Sky's crisis room, chaos reigned. A VP tried to argue that the slap incident was overblown. The PR director responded flatly, "We're not losing flights because of the slap. We're losing credibility because we acted like it didn't happen." Then came the worst news. Their landing rights at Geneva, Munich, and Brussels were under review. Someone muttered, "Is this all because of one grandmother?" But nobody answered, because deep down, they all knew. It wasn't about her, it was about what she exposed. Across the Atlantic, Solène Delacroix sat in her Geneva garden. She wasn't watching the headlines. She was watching Matteo. He was drawing again. This time, not people, but symbols. A boarding pass with a gold seal. A small hand pressing a button. A world map with dotted lines connecting cities. He looked up. "Are we winning?" She smiled, brushing a curl from his temple. "We're not here to win, chérie. We're here to change the rules so the next child never has to fight." Meanwhile, inside the European Aviation Ethics Board, an emergency summit was underway. 27 delegates reviewed the latest AerEthica audit findings. One by one, carriers were asked, "Do you accept the new Passenger Equity Accord standards as binding?" There were hesitations. But then, a quiet voice, the Icelandic delegate, said, "Passengers are no longer asking for comfort. They are asking not to be harmed. If we can't guarantee that, what are we doing?" The room went still. Then, slowly, the vote began. 24 in favor, 3 abstained, none opposed. Back in Washington, a new ripple began. Senator Pierce submitted the first draft of the Passenger Dignity Protection Act, incorporating AerEthica's compliance as a federal benchmark for airline partnerships. A staffer whispered to him, "Sir, we're going to get pushback from the old guard." He didn't hesitate. "Good. If it makes them sweat, it means it's hitting the right nerves." As the week ended, Clara Voss, the flight attendant who had slapped Matteo, received a notice. Her federal flight certification was under review, not for the incident itself, but for failure to comply with pending ethical retraining orders. She stared at the screen. For the first time, the system wasn't protecting her position. It was protecting passengers. A few days later, something unusual happened. A video appeared on Solène's private inbox. It wasn't public. It was from a new hire at Liberty Sky, a young Filipino-American flight attendant named Ezra. He spoke into the camera softly. "I just wanted to say thank you, not just for Matteo, but for all of us who stay silent because we think we're lucky just to be here. I joined this airline hoping to serve with pride. For the first time in months, I believe we will." Solène closed the video slowly. Her eyes glistened, not with pride, but with quiet relief. The ballroom at the United Aviation Conference Center had never seen this much press. Rows of Navy suits and camera flashes, flags from 38 countries lining the walls, a long table stretched across the stage, white cloth, crisp nameplates, and one single document in the center, the Passenger Equity Accord. It wasn't just a charter now, it was a test. Who would sign and who would walk away? Solène Delacroix stood off stage, hands folded, expression unreadable. She wasn't here to speak. She'd done enough of that. Today, she came to witness. Beside her sat Matteo, legs swinging slightly, dressed in a tiny suit jacket that made him look older than 10. His name wasn't on any program, but his presence said everything. A voice cut through the hum of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we begin." The MC, a poised woman from the International Aviation Ethics Council, introduced the first airline delegate, Emir Air. They walked on stage without hesitation. The CEO bowed slightly, signed, and left. Applause. Then came NorthJet, Blue Orbit, Sky Nordic. One by one, the names that mattered signed, not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't afford not to. Each signature carried more than ink. It carried compliance, transparency, a commitment to treating passengers like people, not data points. But the real moment came when the MC paused. "We now call on Liberty Sky." The room stiffened. A dozen cameras zoomed in. Matteo flinched slightly, but Solène placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Just watch," she whispered. From the back of the hall, Ethan Voss, interim CEO of Liberty Sky, emerged. His suit was flawless. His smile was hollow. He walked with calculated poise, but the slight shake in his right hand gave him away. He approached the table. The document sat in front of him. Just one line, just one pen. He picked it up and paused. Then, in full view of every lens in the room, he placed the pen down, unsigned. A gasp rippled across the ballroom. Ethan cleared his throat. "Liberty Sky believes in equality," he began, eyes scanning the room like a chessboard. "But we also believe in sovereignty, the right to set internal standards that match our culture and service models." Polite applause from 3 suits in the back. "Paid for." Ethan added, "We are not prepared to sign the accord at this time." Matteo's eyes dropped, but Solène didn't move, not yet. Ethan turned to exit, trying to walk with power, not retreat. He'd made his statement, he'd taken a stand, but he hadn't reached the curtain when his earpiece buzzed. 3 words. Quiet. Sharp. Final. "They pulled us." His face froze. He turned back to the stage, but no one was looking at him now. They were looking at the screen behind him, where a breaking news banner rolled in. "Geneva, Toronto, and Seoul revoke Liberty Sky's international gate access effective immediately. EU Bank terminates $900 in credit support for non-compliant carriers. SkyPass Alliance removes Liberty Sky from shared booking platform." The room exploded, not in noise, but in shock. Every delegate began whispering. Every CEO instinctively checked their phones. And Ethan Voss, he just stood there. For the first time in his career, a refusal wasn't power. It was irrelevance. Behind the stage, Solène let out a slow breath. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just whispered, "It's starting." Minutes later, the MC returned. "There has been an update," she said calmly. "Due to revocation of platform privileges, Liberty Sky's seat at the Accord has been rendered void." She didn't even say their name again, just moved on. The next signature came faster, and the next. By the end of the hour, 29 carriers had signed, each one with a different accent, different branding, but the same silent message. "We saw what happened on that plane. We don't want to be next." That evening, the video clips went viral. A black grandmother in Geneva watching the live stream, wiping a tear and whispering, "Finally." A flight attendant in Manila, texting her group chat, "We're not invisible anymore." A boy in Harlem, same age as Matteo, saying to his mom, "Does this mean they'll treat me like first class too?" But back at the hotel, Matteo still had questions. He sat on the window ledge, watching the city blur into night. Grand-mère, why didn't you say anything to him? To the Liberty guy? Solène walked over, set down her tea. Because, mon cœur, silence is sometimes the loudest answer. Matteo tilted his head. I don't get it. She smiled gently. You will, one day, when the people who once ignored you start repeating your words, pretending they thought of them first. That's when you'll know you won. At that same moment, across the world, Liberty Sky's board held an emergency call. One of the directors, the usually quiet man from Singapore, broke protocol. We have 48 hours to change course, he said bluntly. Or we lose the next fiscal quarter. Another chimed in. We lose our future. But Ethan? He stayed silent. This time, silence wasn't strategy. It was surrender. Meanwhile, AerEthica updated its live dashboard. For the first time in aviation history, a color-coded real-time map showed passengers where they could fly without fear of bias. Green for compliant, yellow for pending, red for non-signed. Guess who was glowing red? Back at Solène's suite, Matteo had fallen asleep, mouth slightly open, one sock halfway off, a sketchbook on his lap. On the page, a plane, not branded, not first class, just flying. Above it, he'd scribbled a title, Everyone Gets a Window Seat. Solène saw it, kissed his forehead, and walked into the next room. There were emails to answer, and signatures to track. The sky was changing, and she wasn't done yet. 2 weeks had passed since the signing of the Passenger Equity Accord. Liberty Sky had dropped off most global booking platforms. Airports had begun auditing their gate staff for ethics compliance. And the AerEthica dashboard? It was now getting over 2.1 million views a day, but the woman behind it still said nothing publicly. Solène Delacroix refused every press request, declined interviews, ignored all requests for speaking engagements. It wasn't modesty, it was principle. The system wasn't built for applause, she told one advisor quietly. It was built so no child would need to cry quietly in a first-class seat again. But silence has a gravity, and the world had started to ask, who is this woman? That answer came, not in an article, but in a leaked memo. It was a nomination list from the European Aviation Ethics Committee, and under the heading, Executive Director of Global Passenger Equity Reform, 2025-2030. There it was. Her name, Solène Eloise Delacroix. The world blinked, and then scrambled to figure out who she really was. Who is Solène Delacroix? The Guardian, Le Monde, The Atlantic, Al Jazeera. Old photos emerged. One of her in a lab coat, another in front of a chalkboard at MIT, and finally, a grainy shot from a NATO summit nearly 2 decades ago. Former systems ethicist, co-architect of the original ClearPath Protocol, advisor to EU transportation regulators, disappeared from public life in 2010. The pieces began to click. Turns out, Solène hadn't just been a tech pioneer. She had been one of the top minds behind the first international transit ethics frameworks, used across everything from EU train networks to UN refugee corridors. But after a scandal in 2010, involving the misuse of predictive data on asylum routes, she'd resigned quietly, moved to Geneva, and vanished from view. Until now. Until Matteo. Until the slap. Until the flight that changed everything. Back in Geneva, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Agencies wanted her to advise on rail ethics. UN wanted her to lead their new global inclusion charter. A documentary team offered 7 figures. She refused them all. The only meeting she agreed to? A private one, with representatives from the Global Aviation Consortium. They flew in discreetly. 5 people. 3 from North America, 1 from Kenya, 1 from Singapore. They met in a sunlit room in Solène's garden. Matteo wasn't home. He was with his tutor that day. The group didn't bother with small talk. The lead rep, a silver-haired woman named Mariah Clay, leaned forward. We need AerEthica to go beyond voluntary status. Solène sipped her tea. You mean you want it regulated? Mariah nodded. Mandated. Enforceable. We need someone to help design the legal framework, but it needs to carry both technical authority and moral credibility. She looked directly at Solène. That's you. There was a long pause, a swallow of tea. Then, I'll do it, but under one condition. Mariah raised a brow. Name it. I don't want a press conference. I don't want a public stage. And I don't want my name on any golden plaque. She leaned forward, voice calm. I want the new system to be signed in Matteo's name. Call it the West Delacroix Equity Clause. Let the next child know the system was built for them, not for us. Mariah's voice cracked as she said, Deal. Word spread. Within 72 hours, over 19 countries announced intention to adopt AerEthica standards into their regulatory infrastructure. Solène didn't issue a statement. She simply sent a revised protocol to the committee. No name, no quote, just a watermark in the corner. Equity is not kindness, it is design. That night, Matteo sat by the fireplace, flipping through an ethics workbook. Why didn't you tell me you were famous? Solène laughed softly. Fame isn't real, chérie. Influence is, and you don't always want people to know you have it. Matteo frowned. That's confusing. She reached for his hand. One day, someone will try to take your silence as weakness. Let them. Why? Because by the time they realize it was strategy, it'll be too late. The next morning, a letter arrived. Handwritten, no return address. Inside, a photograph of a Liberty Sky employee badge, cut in half, and a short note. I resigned today. I joined to serve people, but I stayed silent too long. Your grandson reminded me who I was. Merci. No name. Solène folded the note, slipped it into her drawer beside Matteo's drawing. Legacy, she thought, wasn't a statue. It was a quiet chain of dignity passed forward. Later that week, a delegation from the U.S. Department of Transportation requested a closed-door session with Solène. Their agenda: adopting AerEthica as a benchmark system for North American passenger operations. Solène didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, where Matteo was drawing again, this time sketching airport security lanes with signs that said, Equity Line, no human left behind. She turned back, smiled. Let's begin. At exactly 9:02 a.m., in a glass conference room overlooking the Seine in Paris, the heads of 7 major financial entities sat down, none of them smiling. Their clients were spooked. Their ESG dashboards were glowing red, and one name kept flashing in their alerts: Liberty Sky. 6 days earlier, the airline had refused to sign the Passenger Equity Accord. Now they weren't just dealing with public outrage, they were bleeding money, quietly, systemically. Let's not waste time, said Léonard Fournier, chair of the ESG Global Credit Consortium. We've got $6.4 billion in aviation exposure tied to AerEthica compliance. Half that is already at risk. The others nodded. No one mentioned the boy, or the slap, or the woman in the silk scarf. But everyone knew. Back in Geneva, Solène sat on the garden bench beside Matteo, helping him review math homework. He was drawing airplanes between problems again. She didn't stop him. A soft chime came from her phone. She glanced at it. It was a notification from an obscure financial monitor tool she had built years ago, a dormant feature of the AerEthica core that alerted when cross-sector ESG-linked portfolios moved in patterns. And today, it was lighting up like a storm. In New York, Meridian Partners pulled $320 million from a Liberty Sky leaseback fund. In Toronto, North Trust Holdings issued a hold advisory across 3 aviation ETFs with non-compliant carriers. In Munich, Green Axis Ventures sent a confidential letter to 5 airlines. Your funding tier will be re-evaluated in 72 hours unless accord signatures are confirmed. Across 4 continents, money began to shift, not dramatically, not publicly, but with surgical precision. Back in the Paris boardroom, one of the quieter men, head of risk from Vega Capital, finally spoke. Let's stop pretending this is about ethics reporting. This is about loss mitigation. He pulled out a tablet and tapped on a screen. A graph appeared on the central monitor. It showed passenger loyalty trust scores and how they dropped 23% across carriers that refused to adopt AerEthica guidelines. When passengers feel unseen, they leave. And when they leave, value disappears. Another exec added, "It's not just lost tickets, it's brand decay, institutional withdrawals. Investors don't want racism in their portfolios anymore. It's bad optics and worse math." The whole table nodded. Meanwhile, Solène received a new email. Subject line: Private session request, Sector Gate Protocol. Attached, a proposed plan by ESG leaders to integrate AerEthica compliance into funding eligibility. Her eyes narrowed. This wasn't just about airlines anymore. This was about control. In Singapore, an emergency summit was announced. The future of ethical aviation finance. Solène's name was not on the agenda, but her system was. Behind closed doors, finance ministers and ESG directors debated a simple question. Should access to credit now require proof of ethics compliance at the passenger level? The idea was radical. Unthinkable 5 years ago. Now, it felt inevitable. That evening, Matteo fell asleep on the sofa with his sketchpad again. Solène sat nearby, reading a transcript of the Paris meeting. At the bottom of one page, someone had scribbled, "If we don't adapt, we don't fly." She closed the folder slowly, stood up, and walked to her desk. From a small wooden box, she pulled out a card, yellowed at the edges, but still legible. It was the first design sketch of AerEthica, drawn over a decade ago. At the top, her old handwriting read, "Equity cannot be optional. It must be expensive to ignore." The next morning, the headlines were clear. 1.9 billion in ESG credit lines frozen across 4 airlines. 8 airports suspend gate access for Liberty Sky. FAA releases draft framework to adopt AerEthica as pre-certification standard. And in small print, barely noticed. The proposed ethics condition is based on the Delacroix framework, later named West Clause. Matteo noticed. "That's my name," he whispered, eyes wide. Solène looked up. "It is, but it doesn't belong to you." "Then who?" "Every child who sits in silence while being told they don't belong." At the same moment in Brussels, a call came through. "We need Solène in the next IMF Aviation Roundtable, quietly." And in Washington, if we tie equity to credit access, we can force real reform without passing a single bill. By week's end, 3 more airlines had signed the accord. Each one posted the same line. "This is not a rebranding, it's a relearning." In Geneva, Matteo received a letter from a classmate's mom. Inside was a drawing, a picture of him in a first-class seat with a caption written in a child's hand. "You belong here." Solène smiled quietly as he read it aloud. For the first time in days, she looked tired, but satisfied. "It's working," Matteo said. She nodded. "Yes, and now it must last." The invitation arrived in the most unassuming way. A sealed envelope, delivered by courier. Matteo had been painting outside, a skyline of airports and solar panels, when the man approached. He handed it to Solène without a word. Inside, it read, "You are hereby requested to attend the closed executive session on global aviation equity standards, hosted by International Monetary Fund location, Geneva Civic Complex, 3rd floor, room 314. Time, 10 o'clock a.m., Thursday." She folded it once, didn't blink. Didn't even sigh. Matteo looked up. "Are you going?" She kissed the top of his head. "I don't want to, but sometimes the rooms you never wanted to enter are the ones that need your voice the most." Thursday, 9:57 a.m. The hallway outside room 314 was strangely silent for a global economic meeting. No press, no cameras. Just 12 individuals. The ones who wrote the rules no one saw, the ones who moved 80 ballers before lunchtime. When Solène entered, no one stood, but they all watched her closely. Some recognized her from decades past. Others only knew the name, but every single one of them had read the file. At the head of the table sat a woman in a navy dress suit, IMF Director Marianne Koch. She gestured for Solène to sit. "We appreciate you coming. There's no recording. This is a closed consultative session." Solène simply nodded. Her silence made some uncomfortable. That was the point. A man from the European Central Bank cleared his throat. "We'll speak plainly, Madame Delacroix. AerEthica is no longer a moral tool. It's becoming a financial mechanism, and we need to know how far you intend to take this." Solène studied him, then replied with measured calm. "You're asking the wrong question." Pause. "You should be asking, how far will the people take it, with or without your permission?" The room shifted. Koch spoke again. "Let's not play semantics. Your system froze $6.4 billion in under 9 minutes. You knew what would happen." Solène nodded. "Of course. So, what is your endgame?" She folded her hands. "Equity is a default condition, not an upgrade, not a marketing word, not a PR checkbox. Equity is a prerequisite for money." The air turned still. A man from the African Union delegation leaned forward. "And what would that look like?" Solène glanced at the folder in front of her, then slid it forward. Inside, the Passenger Equity Implementation Charter, or what she called the spine. Real-time cabin ethics audits, equity-triggered payment halts, ESG tiered funding access linked to behavior, not branding, a shared blacklist for high-violation staff and vendors, passenger dignity metrics across nationality, language, and mobility. Silence. Then someone whispered, "This would change everything." Solène looked directly at him. "That's the point." A representative from Brazil, older and more cautious, finally asked, "But who decides what's ethical? What if cultural values differ?" Solène leaned back. "Ethics isn't about culture, it's about harm. And every passenger knows what harm feels like, no matter the language." One of the American reps, visibly tense, said, "You realize this creates an entirely new class of liability for airlines." Solène didn't flinch. "No, it exposes the one you've ignored." Koch folded her hands. "Let me ask you this, Madame Delacroix. Why you? Why now? You've avoided power for 2 decades." A long pause. Then Solène answered softly, "Because one child sat in a seat he paid for and was slapped in public for daring to exist in the wrong class." She looked up, eyes steady. "And I realized I had designed systems, but not shields. That was my mistake. This is my correction." The silence after her words was not awkward. It was reverent. Koch leaned forward. "What do you want from us?" "I want you to adopt the charter. I want ESG funding tied to real passenger treatment, not corporate statements. I want the market to favor dignity." Pause. "And I want the next child like Matteo to never need someone like me to fix it after." Koch looked at the others. No one objected. Some nodded. One wiped away a tear. At 11:12 a.m., the vote was taken, unanimous. The Passenger Equity Implementation Charter would be ratified as an international benchmark, a condition for accessing IMF-backed credit pools across 28 nations. AerEthica wasn't a suggestion anymore. It was infrastructure. When Solène exited the building, the sun was just starting to warm the cobblestones. Matteo was sitting on a bench nearby, drawing again. He looked up as she approached. "Was it scary?" She smiled. "Yes, but only at first." "Did they listen?" "They had to." "Why?" She sat beside him. "Because when money meets truth, only one of them gets to stay." As they walked home, hand in hand, a small breeze rustled through the leaves. Solène paused, glanced up at the sky, and whispered, "You did it, little one." Your silence shook an empire. They didn't attack Solène directly. They knew better. Instead, they went after her grandson, quietly, strategically, cruelly. On a Wednesday morning, a photo of Matteo began circulating in online groups tied to aviation forums and investor chats. It showed him in first class, sipping orange juice. The caption read, "Privilege is now defined by tears and tantrums. Welcome to the new ESG theater. Solène's team flagged it in less than 5 minutes. By noon, 3 more memes appeared, mocking Matteo's age, his expression, even the color of his shoes. The most viral one read, "Get slapped, freeze 6.4b, try that with math homework." At dinner, Solène didn't show Matteo the posts. She wouldn't give cruelty oxygen. But Matteo already knew. He pushed his plate aside. "They're laughing at me." Solène sat still. "Why do you think that is?" "Because I'm a kid. Because I didn't yell back. Because I didn't do anything." Solène nodded. "And that scares them more than if you had screamed." Meanwhile, Liberty Sky's senior team gathered in a private boardroom. They had signed the accord, under pressure, but never intended to comply. Their strategy: weaponize public fatigue. One exec said, "If we can paint AerEthica as a tool for rich elites and oversensitive kids, we kill the moral edge." Another added, "It's not about disproving the slap. It's about reframing the story. Matteo as a symbol of entitlement, not injustice." They called it the Reset Campaign. Funded in part by a shadow PAC connected to rival airlines. The next morning, a journalist emailed Solène, requesting comment. "Are you grooming Matteo to be a political figure? Some sources say your family is profiting from victimhood." Solène didn't reply. Instead, she turned to Matteo. "Do you want to speak?" He hesitated. Then, "No, you don't have to." "But I want to, in my own way." That Sunday, Matteo asked for help scanning a letter. He had written it by hand, in blue pen, on a single page. Solène scanned it, read it once, said nothing. They uploaded it to a small, quiet web page. No headlines, no logos, no comments section. Just the letter. It began, "My name is Matteo. I was the boy on that plane. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say. I still don't. But I know what fairness feels like, and I know what it doesn't." The letter ended. "I'm not trying to be famous. I'm trying to feel safe sitting where I belong." No tweet, no video, no hashtags. But within 48 hours, the page had 2.4 million visits. Teachers began reading it aloud in classrooms. Parents printed it for their kids. A prominent columnist called it the quietest mic drop of the year. Back at Liberty Sky, their media team panicked. Their strategy had been built on Matteo staying silent or exploding, but he'd done neither. And now, they looked cruel, corporate, and clumsy. At bedtime, Matteo asked Solène, "Is it over?" She smiled gently. "It's never over, but the world hears you now." He pulled the covers to his chin. "I didn't want to be brave." "You didn't have to be. You just had to stay true." By Tuesday morning, Liberty Sky was hemorrhaging. Not just in money, in trust, and in infrastructure. It started with an announcement from Brussels International. Effective immediately, Liberty Sky's gate privileges are suspended pending AerEthica review. Then came Toronto Pearson, Munich, and Barcelona, each citing compliance irregularities. Within 36 hours, 8 international airports severed operational ties. At Liberty Sky headquarters, the tone had shifted from arrogance to panic. Their general counsel whispered to the CEO, "This isn't about PR anymore. We're being choked out, structurally." They reached out to AerEthica's arbitration board, hoping for a private settlement. But no one returned the call, because they hadn't offended a system. They'd mocked a boy. Back in Geneva, Solène received a different kind of message. A short, one-line email from the president of the European ESG Committee. "It's done. All 12 airports have activated the Charter 12 protocol." 12. That number mattered. Charter 12 wasn't just symbolic. It was operational law across participating hubs. It mandated that any airline flagged as non-compliant by AerEthica would be denied gate access, forfeit ESG-linked funding, be delisted from 4 major booking platforms, be reported to the FAA for reconsideration of international licensing. Liberty Sky didn't just lose terminals, they lost connectivity. In a private call with the IMF, the Liberty Sky CEO tried to argue back. "This is cancel culture dressed as compliance." The reply was swift. "No, This is consequences dressed as standards. Meanwhile, Matteo was sitting on the classroom floor, helping another student build a paper plane. A teacher approached with a smile. "You're famous now." He looked up, blinking. "I didn't want to be, but people were talking." His letter had been translated into 17 languages. It was printed on the front page of Le Monde and shared in an open letter by the United Nations Youth Committee. Not as policy, as poetry. "I'm not trying to be famous. I'm trying to feel safe sitting where I belong." The backlash against Liberty Sky wasn't loud. It was organized. Blackstone Aviation Finance pulled $680 in lease guarantees. Ethos Corps downgraded them to Tier 4, triggering $910 in ESG withdrawals. Fair Sky Systems revoked biometric tech licenses, citing breach of ethical deployment. Within 72 hours, Liberty Sky lost $1.73 billion in value. They fired 4 executives, held a press conference, apologized, but no one listened. Not because it was too late, because they'd never meant it. Solène refused all interview requests. When asked why, she replied, "This isn't my story to explain." "Then whose is it?" "Theirs," she said, pointing to a group of children boarding a tram, backpacks bouncing. At an investors' summit in Singapore, the CEO of a competing airline stood on stage. "We signed the accord late, but we've learned, if the cabin is unequal, the plane is unstable, no matter how well you fly it." The room applauded, and somewhere in the back row, a quiet executive from a pension fund smiled. Because ethics was no longer a charity, it was a condition. Later that week, Matteo sat in a quiet cafe with Solène. He stirred his hot chocolate. "Is it really over now?" She thought for a moment. "For Liberty Sky? Maybe. And for me?" She looked him in the eye. "You don't need to do anything else? You've already changed more than most adults ever will." "But I didn't fix the world." "No," she said gently. "You showed the world it's broken, and that's how fixing begins." That night, Liberty Sky's final operating route into a Charter 12 airport was closed. The airline issued a desperate public statement claiming, "We were misunderstood. Our staff are under attack. We value diversity." It fell flat, because diversity isn't a slogan. It's a seat that no one should have to earn through silence or pain. In a small airport art gallery in Geneva, a new exhibit was unveiled. It was simple. A child's drawing, Matteo's, of an airplane. Crayons, slanted lines, a first-class cabin with all different kinds of passengers smiling. Underneath, a plaque read, "You belong here, M. West, age 8. It became the most photographed spot in the terminal. Business travelers stopped. Parents wept. Pilots stood quietly for minutes before boarding. 2 months later, Liberty Sky filed for bankruptcy restructuring. It wasn't the slap that broke them. It was the refusal to listen to what it meant. As for Matteo, he started learning the violin. He wasn't very good. Didn't care. He just liked how the strings hummed when he got the note right. "It's like when everything finally fits," he said. Solène smiled. "That's called harmony." He paused. "Can people have that too?" She kissed his forehead. "Only if we remember how. And now we want to hear from you. Have you ever been judged just for sitting where you belong? Tell us your story, or tell us where you're watching from. Because sometimes, just by speaking up, we change more than we know. If Matteo's quiet courage moved you, hit like, share this with someone who still believes in fairness, and subscribe for more real, powerful telltales that remind us respect isn't earned, it's owed.